The kitchen sink had been dripping for 3 weeks when I finally decided to fix it. Funny how the smallest things can change your entire life. There I was, lying on my back under the cabinet with a wrench in my hand, when I heard Serene's voice drift in from the living room. "Why can't you be more like Jessica's husband? Trent just bought her a BMW." I stopped turning the wrench. The voice on the other end of the phone was muffled, but Seren's response came through crystal clear. "I know, right? Sometimes I wonder what I was thinking when I married a guy who fixes sinks instead of buying new houses." I slid out from under the cabinet and sat there on the cold linoleum, staring at the ceiling. 22 years of marriage, and this is what it came down to. A BMW and a husband who could afford to throw money around like confetti. "Good point," I said to the empty kitchen. The next morning, I sent an email to Arden Weller, the sharpest attorney in our mid-sized New England city. The message was simple. Draft the prenup. Make it like Trent's, plus infidelity and hidden debt provisions. Arden's response came back within an hour. "Interesting timing, Darren. Let's talk. Our town wasn't the kind of place where people got prenups after 22 years of marriage. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, where the old neighborhoods still had secrets buried in their foundations, and where the local boxing gym served as both sanctuary and confessional for men like me. I'd built my construction business from nothing, working 16-hour days while Seren climbed the corporate ladder at the regional insurance firm. We'd raised our daughter Ava in the half-renovated house on Maple Street, the one with the perpetually unfinished basement and the front porch that sagged just enough to annoy the neighbors. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was keeping up with Jessica and Trent Ardell, the golden couple who lived in the mansion on Elm Street and drove matching luxury cars. I pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's boxing gym, a converted warehouse that smelled like sweat and determination. Eli Halloway, no relation despite the shared last name, was working the heavy bag with the intensity that belied his 60-plus years. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Eli said without looking up. "Worse, someone stole my wife's respect." Eli stopped punching and turned to face me. His weathered face showed the kind of wisdom that only came from decades of watching young men learn hard lessons. "Never let them see you bleed, Darren. Fight smart, not angry." "What if I want to do both?" "Then you better have a plan." I did have a plan. It was forming in my mind like a photograph developing in a darkroom, each detail becoming clearer with every passing hour. That evening, Seren was in full social climbing mode, preparing for Jessica's dinner party. She stood in front of our bedroom mirror, trying on her third outfit of the night. "Do you think this makes me look desperate?" she asked, adjusting a necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary. "No more than usual," I replied from the bed where I was scrolling through my phone. She spun around, her face flushed with irritation. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, honey. You look great." But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was reading the text messages I'd discovered on her phone earlier that day, the ones she thought she'd hidden. Messages from someone named Ricky B. that painted a very different picture of my devoted wife. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The Riverside Motel, room 237. Darren's working late again. Perfect timing. You deserve so much better than that loser." I'd taken screenshots of everything before carefully placing her phone back exactly where I'd found it. Now, watching her fuss over her appearance for Jessica's party, I felt something cold and calculating settle into my chest. Our daughter Ava bounded into the room, her phone already recording. At 16, she documented everything for her social media followers. "Hey TikTok, check out my parents getting ready for another boring adult party where they'll pretend to be happy." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She turned the camera on me. "And here's my dad, the guy who thinks fixing sinks is a personality trait." The video went live before I could object. Within an hour, it had dozens of comments from her classmates, most of them variations on, "Your dad seems cool," and "At least he's not fake like other parents." But the damage was already done. Ava had publicly labeled me as the family disappointment, and Seren had liked the video. The next morning, I drove to Ardell Motors, the used car dealership on the outskirts of town. The lot was full of shiny vehicles with inflated price tags, the kind of place that preyed on people's insecurities about status. That's where I saw them. Seren and a man I assumed was Ricky B. were standing behind a red convertible, locked in an embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. He was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of artificial charm that came from years of selling overpriced cars to desperate customers. I sat in my truck and watched them for 10 minutes, taking pictures with my phone. When they finally separated, Ricky slapped Seren's rear end and laughed. She giggled like a teenager. I waited until Seren left before getting out of my truck. I walked casually through the lot, pretending to examine the cars while keeping an eye on Ricky's movements. He was showing a sedan to an elderly couple, his salesman smile in full effect. The box cutter in my pocket felt heavy and purposeful. I'd been carrying it for work so long that it felt like an extension of my hand. When I reached Ricky's silver BMW, parked in the Employee of the Month spot, I knelt down and went to work. 4 tires, 4 quick slashes. The air hissed out like the sound of deflating dreams. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I turned around to find Mrs. Preston, our nosy neighbor, standing behind me with a shocked expression. She'd apparently been car shopping and witnessed my moment of creative expression. I winked at her and put the box cutter back in my pocket. "Community service, Mrs. Preston, just keeping the neighborhood standards up." She stared at me for a moment, then broke into a grin. "Well, I never liked that car anyway. Too flashy for a man his age." I was halfway home when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained a photo of me slashing Ricky's tires, taken from across the parking lot. "We need to talk. Now." I recognized Seren's writing style, even in all caps. She was furious, which meant she'd been in contact with Ricky immediately after discovering his flat tires. The speed of their communication told me everything I needed to know about how deep this relationship had gone. Instead of going home, I drove to Arden Weller's law office. The building was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate opposing counsel and impress clients. Arden herself was a force of nature, a woman who'd built her reputation on being smarter and more ruthless than anyone else in the room. "Darren," she said, gesturing for me to sit down in her corner office. "I've been expecting you." "The prenup," I said. "How fast can you make it happen?" "That depends on how creative you want to get." She opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a thick document. I took the liberty of researching Trent Ardell's prenuptial agreement. It's quite comprehensive. "Show me." For the next hour, Arden walked me through the intricacies of modern prenuptial agreements. Infidelity clauses, asset protection, hidden debt provisions, social media restrictions. It was like learning a new language, one designed specifically for revenge. "The beauty of this approach," Arden explained, "is that everything is perfectly legal. If Seren signs this document, she's agreeing to terms that heavily favor you in case of divorce, and if she refuses to sign, then I know exactly where I stand. Exactly." Arden leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "When do you want to present this to her?" "Tomorrow night, at Jessica's dinner party." "Public pressure. I like your style." I drove home through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the faded shopping plazas and corner bars where locals gathered to share gossip and complaints. This was my world, the place where I'd built my reputation as a reliable contractor and devoted family man. But that version of Darren Halloway was about to disappear forever. Seren was waiting for me in the kitchen, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. She held up her phone, displaying the photo of me vandalizing Ricky's car. "Are you out of your mind?" she hissed. "Probably," I replied, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a bottle of water. "But I'm just getting started." Jessica Ardell's dinner parties were legendary in our social circle, the kind of events where appearances mattered more than actual enjoyment. Her house on Elm Street was a monument to good taste and disposable income, with its perfectly manicured lawn and imported stone driveway. I adjusted my tie as we walked up to the front door, carrying the bottle of wine Seren had insisted we bring. She'd been silent during the drive over, still processing my admission that I was just getting started with whatever game I was playing. "Darren," she said quietly as we reached the porch, "we need to talk about what happened today." "We will," I assured her. "Tonight." Jessica opened the door with her trademark hostess smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She was the kind of woman who'd perfected the art of social manipulation, always knowing exactly what to say to make people feel simultaneously welcome and inadequate. "Seren, Darren, come in, come in. Trent's in the living room with the others." The others turned out to be the usual suspects from our town's aspiring upper class. Real estate agents, insurance executives, a few lawyers, and their carefully groomed spouses, the kind of people who measured success in square footage and luxury car payments. Trent Ardell held court near the fireplace, regaling his audience with stories about his latest business acquisition. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, polished, comfortable in expensive clothes, and possessed of the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. "Darren," he called out when he saw me. "How's the construction business? Still building dreams one nail at a time?" The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Around us, conversations paused as people waited to see how I'd respond. Actually, Trent, I wanted to thank you for the inspiration. Inspiration? Your prenup. Brilliant idea. I'm having one drawn up for Seren and me. The room went completely quiet. Even the background music seemed to fade away as every person in the room turned to stare at us. Serene's face went pale. Darren, what are you... It's never too late to protect your assets, I continued, addressing Trent but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, especially when you've worked so hard to build something worthwhile. Jessica appeared at my elbow, her hostess instincts kicking in. Why don't we move to the dining room? Dinner's ready. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the contact information for Arden Weller. In fact, I think we should schedule the signing for this week. Very public, very official. Arden Weller's office, Thursday at 2 o'clock. Everyone's invited to witness it. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Trent started laughing, a nervous sound that didn't match his usual confidence. Well, that's certainly unexpected. Serene grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin through my jacket. Darren, can I speak with you privately? Of course, honey, but first, let me call Arden and confirm the appointment. I dialed the number while the entire room watched. Arden answered on the second ring, and I put the call on speaker. Darren, how did the conversation go? Better than expected. We're scheduling the signing for Thursday at 2. Public ceremony, just like we discussed. Excellent. I'll have the documents ready. Should I prepare the standard infidelity and hidden debt clauses? Seren made a strangled sound beside me. Around the room, I could see people pulling out their phones, undoubtedly texting this development to friends who weren't present. All of them, I confirmed. Every single clause we discussed. Perfect. See you Thursday. I hung up and looked around the room at the shocked faces staring back at me. These were people who thrived on gossip and social drama, and I just handed them the story of the year. Now, I said to Seren, what did you want to discuss privately? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked toward the front door, her heels clicking against Jessica's imported marble floors. I followed her outside, where she spun around to face me with fury blazing in her eyes. Have you lost your mind? A prenup? After 22 years? You're the one who wanted me to be more like Trent. Well, Trent protects his assets. This is humiliating. For who? You or me? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Behind us, I could see faces pressed against Jessica's front windows, watching our argument like it was dinner theater. Get in the car, Seren said finally. We're going home. Actually, I think I'll walk. It's a nice night, and I need to think. Think about what? About whether my wife is worth fighting for. I turned and started walking down Elm Street, leaving Seren standing alone in Jessica's driveway. Behind me, I could hear car doors slamming and engines starting as the dinner party guests rushed to spread the news of our public meltdown. My phone started buzzing with text messages before I'd walked 2 blocks. Word was already spreading through our social network like wildfire. Dude, what's going on? From my friend Mike at the gym. Call me ASAP from my business partner. Is everything okay? From my sister in California. But the message that interested me most came from an unknown number. You just made a big mistake, old man. I had a pretty good idea who old man was and where the message had originated. Ricky B. was apparently not happy about the turn of events, which meant Seren had been in contact with him immediately after our public confrontation. Instead of going home, I drove to Murphy's boxing gym. The place was nearly empty at this hour, just a few dedicated fighters working the heavy bags and speed bags. Eli was in his office, going over the books. Rough night? He asked, looking up from his paperwork. Getting better by the minute? I spent the next hour working out my frustrations on the heavy bag, throwing combinations until my hands ached and my shirt was soaked with sweat. Physical exertion had always been my way of thinking through problems, and tonight I had plenty to think about. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. Serene's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark except for a single light in our bedroom window. I let myself in quietly and found her sitting on the bed, still wearing her dinner party dress. We need to talk, she said without looking up. I'm listening. This prenup idea is crazy. We've been married for over 20 years. We have a daughter together. We own this house together. Actually, the house is in my name. I bought it before we got married. She looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been thinking about asset protection for longer than you might realize. That wasn't entirely true, but it had the desired effect. Serene's face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to anger, to something that might have been fear. Darren, what's this really about? I sat down in the chair across from the bed, studying my wife's face in the dim lamplight. She was still beautiful, even after 22 years and all the stress of raising a teenager. But there was something different about her now, something calculating that I'd never noticed before. It's about respect, I said finally, and about making sure everyone knows where they stand. I don't understand. You will, Thursday at 2 o'clock. I got up and headed for the guest bedroom, leaving Seren alone with her thoughts and whatever messages she was undoubtedly sending to Ricky B. The next morning, I woke up to find 17 missed calls and 43 text messages on my phone. News of the prenup announcement had spread through our entire social network overnight, and everyone wanted details. But the message that caught my attention came from Gina Mathis, who worked in HR at Seren's insurance company. Coffee this morning? I have something you need to know about your wife? I met Gina at the diner on Main Street, a place where the coffee was strong and the conversations were private. She was waiting in a corner booth, nervously stirring sugar into her cup. Darren, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Seren's been asking a lot of questions about employee expense accounts and company credit cards. What kind of questions? The kind that make me think she's been using them for personal purchases. And there's something else. Gina leaned across the table, lowering her voice. Her resume. When she applied for the promotion last year, there were some discrepancies in her educational background. Discrepancies? She claimed to have a master's degree from Boston University, but when I called to verify, they had no record of her ever attending. I sat back in the booth, processing this information. Seren had been lying about her credentials and possibly embezzling from her company. The woman who'd spent 22 years lecturing me about responsibility and success had been building her career on fraud. Why are you telling me this? Gina looked uncomfortable. Because you're a good guy, and you deserve to know what you're dealing with, and because... She hesitated. Because she's been bragging about having a backup plan if things don't work out with you. What kind of backup plan? The kind that involves a guy who owns a car dealership and promises to take her away from all this. I thanked Gina and drove home, my mind racing with possibilities. Seren wasn't just cheating on me, she was planning to leave me for Ricky B, and she'd been stealing from her company to finance her exit strategy. But two could play that game. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls and moving money. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, the business checking account. Everything that could be legally transferred or protected was secured by close of business. When Seren came home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen with a stack of bank statements and a calculator. How was work? I asked casually. Fine. Listen, about this prenup thing. I've been thinking about that too, and about a lot of other things. I spread the bank statements across the kitchen table. Did you know that our joint checking account had been accessed 17 times in the past month from ATMs I've never used? Seren's face went pale. I can explain. And our credit cards have been charged for hotel rooms, restaurant meals, and shopping trips that I definitely didn't authorize. Darren, but here's the really interesting part. I picked up a printout from my business account. As of this afternoon, all joint accounts have been frozen pending the prenup signing. For asset protection purposes, you understand. The silence that followed was deafening. Seren stared at the papers spread across the table, her mind clearly racing through the implications of what I'd just told her. You can't do this, she said finally. Actually, I can, and I have. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Looks like your friend Ricky is having some car trouble. Something about his entire inventory being repossessed due to unpaid loans. Seren's eyes widened. How do you... Amazing what you can accomplish when you know the right people in the banking industry. I stood up and gathered the papers from the table. Thursday at 2 o'clock, Seren, Arden Weller's office. Don't be late. As I walked out of the kitchen, I could hear her frantically dialing her phone. But somehow, I doubted Ricky B was going to be much help anymore. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of gray, oppressive weather that seemed to mirror the mood in our house. Seren hadn't spoken to me since our conversation in the kitchen 2 days earlier, communicating only through terse notes left on the refrigerator. Taking Ava to school, don't wait up. Working late, again. Your lawyer called. I'll be there. That last note was propped against my coffee mug when I came down for breakfast. Seren was already gone, but the scent of her perfume lingered in the air like an accusation. I arrived at Arden Weller's office 30 minutes early, partly to review the documents one final time and partly to watch the other attendees arrive. Word of the prenup signing had spread through our social circle like a virus, and I'd received confirmation that at least a dozen people planned to attend as witnesses. Arden's conference room had been set up like a small theater, with chairs arranged in rows facing a polished oak table where the documents waited. The prenup itself was a masterpiece of legal precision, 47 pages of clauses and subclauses that would make a Supreme Court justice proud. Nervous? Arden asked as we reviewed the final details. Excited, I corrected. This is going to be educational for everyone involved. The first arrivals were Jessica and Trent, who took seats in the front row like they were attending a Broadway show. Jessica kept glancing at her phone, presumably texting updates to friends who couldn't make it in person. Mike from the gym showed up with 2 other guys from our Tuesday night poker game. Mrs. Preston arrived wearing what appeared to be her best church dress, clearly treating this as the social event of the season, but the person I was most interested in seeing was Gina Mathis, who slipped into the back row just as Arden was preparing to begin. She caught my eye and nodded slightly, confirming that she'd followed through on our conversation from earlier in the week. Seren arrived exactly at 2 o'clock, wearing a black business suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Her face was pale but composed, the expression of someone who'd spent considerable time preparing for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Arden began, we're here today to witness the signing of a postnuptial agreement between Darren and Seren Holloway. This document has been prepared in accordance with state law and represents a mutual agreement between both parties regarding the division of assets in the event of divorce. She opened the document to the first page and began reading aloud. The opening clauses were standard legal language, but as she progressed through the document, the terms became increasingly specific and increasingly favorable to me. In the event of proven infidelity by either party, the unfaithful spouse forfeits all claims to marital assets, including but not limited to real estate, investment accounts, business interests, and retirement funds. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This wasn't the kind of language people expected to hear in a document between spouses who'd been married for over 20 years. Furthermore, Arden continued, any debts incurred by either party without the knowledge and consent of the other spouse shall be the sole responsibility of the party who incurred said debts. Seren shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Around the room, I could see people pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Additionally, any misrepresentation of educational credentials, employment history, or financial status shall constitute grounds for immediate termination of this agreement with full penalty clauses in effect. That's when Seren stood up. I need to speak with my husband privately. I'm afraid that's not possible, Arden replied smoothly. The signing ceremony has already begun. Any private conversations should have taken place before today. This is ridiculous, Seren said, her voice rising. Darren, you can't be serious about this. Serious, I replied, then caught myself. Completely serious. Arden turned to the next page. Now we come to the specific clauses regarding asset protection and disclosure requirements. What followed was a detailed inventory of every asset, every account, and every debt associated with our marriage. But it wasn't just a list. It was an exposé. The document revealed Seren's unauthorized use of company credit cards, her falsified resume, her secret personal loan, and her undisclosed gambling debts. How did you? Seren started, then stopped herself. Public records, I said simply. Amazing what you can discover when you know where to look. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word, as Arden methodically destroyed the facade that Seren had been maintaining for years. By the time she reached the final clauses, my wife's carefully constructed image lay in ruins. And finally, Arden said, we have the infidelity clause, which specifically addresses relationships with third parties, including but not limited to Richard Bell, also known as Ricky B., owner of Ardell Motors. The gasp that went up from the audience was audible. Jessica Ardell's face went white as she realized that her husband's name was somehow connected to this mess. Wait, Trent said, standing up. What does my dealership have to do with this? Arden smiled. I'm glad you asked. It seems that Mr. Bell has been using your business name and credit line to finance his personal activities, including hotel rooms and expensive gifts for Mrs. Holloway. The room erupted in chaos. Trent was shouting questions at Jessica, who was frantically denying any knowledge of Ricky's activities. Seren was trying to leave, but found her path blocked by the other attendees who were demanding explanations. In the middle of it all, Gina Mathis stood up and cleared her throat. If I may, she said loudly enough to cut through the noise, I have something to add to this discussion. The room gradually quieted as everyone turned to look at her. I work in HR at Meridian Insurance, where Seren is employed, or rather, where she was employed until this morning. Seren's face went completely pale. Gina, don't... The company completed its investigation into expense account irregularities yesterday. Seren Holloway was terminated for embezzlement and fraud. The police report will be filed on Monday. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the room, phones were buzzing with incoming calls and text messages as word of the scandal spread in real time, but I wasn't finished yet. "There's one more thing," I said, standing up and pulling out my phone. "I think everyone should see this." I opened the video app and played the recording I'd made the previous evening. It showed Seren and Ricky in the parking lot of the Riverside Motel, engaged in a passionate embrace while discussing their plans to leave town together once Seren had cleaned out my business accounts. "You said you'd have the money by Friday." Ricky's voice came through clearly on the recording. "I'm working on it," Seren replied. "Darren's too stupid to notice what's happening until it's too late." The video continued for another 30 seconds, documenting their plan to drain my business accounts and disappear to Florida, where Ricky claimed to have connections in the used car business. When the video ended, the room was completely silent, except for the sound of Mrs. Preston quietly sobbing into her handkerchief. Seren looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Neighbors, friends, acquaintances who'd known her for years and were now seeing her in an entirely different light. "I can explain," she said weakly. "No need," I replied. "I think the video speaks for itself." Arden cleared her throat. "Given the circumstances that have come to light during this proceeding, I think it's safe to say that the prenuptial agreement is no longer necessary. Mrs. Holloway has already violated multiple clauses, which means the penalty provisions are now in effect." "What does that mean?" Seren asked. "It means you get nothing," I said simply. "The house, the business, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it stays with me. You get to keep your personal belongings and whatever money you can earn going forward." "You can't do this." "Actually," Arden interjected, "he can, and he has. The documents were filed with the court this morning, along with evidence of your fraudulent activities and extramarital relationship." Seren looked around the room desperately, searching for a sympathetic face. But the people who'd once been her friends and neighbors were now staring at her with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "Jessica," she said finally, turning to her best friend, "tell them this isn't what it looks like." But Jessica was dealing with her own crisis. Trent was demanding to know how Ricky had gained access to the dealership's credit line, and Jessica's evasive answers were only making him more suspicious. "Actually," Jessica said slowly, "I think there's something I need to tell everyone." The room fell silent again as Jessica stood up, her face pale but determined. "Ricky Bell isn't just some random car salesman. He's my cousin, and I'm the one who introduced him to Seren." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Trent staggered backward, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "You what?" I thought if Seren had an affair, it would make her appreciate what she had. I never intended for it to go this far." "You orchestrated this?" Seren demanded. "You set me up?" "I was trying to help you. You were always complaining about Darren, about how boring your life was. I thought if you had a little excitement, you'd realize how good you actually had it." The room erupted in chaos again as the full scope of Jessica's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just introduced Seren to Ricky. She'd encouraged the affair, provided opportunities for them to meet, and even helped Ricky gain access to Trent's business resources. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. "There's something else," Jessica continued, tears streaming down her face. "Ricky and we've been having an affair too, for over a year." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Mrs. Preston stopped crying as the implications of Jessica's confession sank in. Trent sat down heavily in his chair, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "You've been sleeping with your cousin?" "He's my second cousin," Jessica said weakly, as if that made it better. "And you used my wife to cover it up," I added. Jessica nodded miserably. "I thought if Seren was having an affair too, no one would suspect anything about Ricky and me." The room exploded in conversation as everyone tried to process what they'd just learned. This wasn't just a simple case of marital infidelity, it was a complex web of manipulation and betrayal that had destroyed multiple families. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one more card to play. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my voice to cut through the noise, "I think it's time for the final reveal." I pulled out my phone and opened a different video file. This was recorded last night at the Riverside Motel, room 237. The video showed Jessica and Ricky together, discussing their plan to manipulate both Seren and Trent. But more importantly, it showed Jessica admitting that she'd been stealing from Trent's business accounts to finance their affair. "We just need to keep this going a little longer," Jessica's voice came through clearly. Once Seren and Darren are divorced and Trent finds out about her affair, I'll get everything in the divorce settlement. Then we can disappear together." When the video ended, Trent was staring at his wife with an expression of pure hatred. "You destroyed my business," he said quietly. "You destroyed our marriage. And you destroyed our friend's marriage just to cover your own tracks." Jessica tried to respond, but no words came out. Around the room, people were gathering their belongings and heading for the exits, eager to escape the toxic atmosphere and spread the news of what they'd witnessed. As the conference room emptied, I found myself alone with Arden, who was carefully packing the legal documents into her briefcase. "Well," she said with satisfaction, "that went better than expected." "Better?" "You got everything you wanted. Your wife's affair is exposed, her accomplices are ruined, and you keep all your assets. Plus, you've got enough evidence to ensure that none of them will be able to cause you any more trouble." I looked around the empty conference room, thinking about the lives that had been destroyed in the past hour. Seren's career was over, her reputation was in ruins, and she faced possible criminal charges. Jessica's marriage was finished, and her social standing was obliterated. Ricky's business was gone, and he was likely facing fraud charges of his own. "What happens now?" I asked. Arden smiled. "Now you get to start over. A clean slate, no baggage, and a very expensive lesson learned about choosing your partners more carefully." As I walked out of the law office into the gray afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom. The weight of a failing marriage, the stress of financial uncertainty, and the burden of living a lie were all gone. But the story wasn't over yet. There was still one more confrontation waiting, and I had a feeling it was going to be the most important one of all. The Riverside Motel sat on the outskirts of town like a monument to poor decisions and broken promises. It was the kind of place where people went when they wanted to disappear for a few hours, where the desk clerk didn't ask questions and the parking lot was always half empty. I'd been watching the place for 3 hours, sitting in my truck with a clear view of room 237, the same room where Seren and Ricky had been meeting for the past 6 months, according to the credit card records I'd obtained. My phone buzzed with another text message, the 15th one since leaving Arden's office. Word of the prenup disaster had spread through town like wildfire, and everyone wanted to know what happened next. "Dude, is it true about Seren and the car guy?" From Mike at the gym. "Call me when you get this. We need to talk." From my business partner. "Dad, what the heck is going on? My friends are texting me crazy stuff." From Ava, who was apparently getting updates from her classmates whose parents had attended the signing. But the message I was waiting for finally arrived at 6:47 p.m. "Room 237. We need to talk. Come alone." It was from Ricky's phone, but I had a feeling the message hadn't been composed by him. The grammar was too good, and the tone was too controlled. This had Seren's fingerprints all over it. I grabbed the gym bag from the passenger seat and walked across the cracked asphalt parking lot. The bag contained a few items I'd picked up on the way over. A digital camera, a portable speaker, and a manila envelope full of documents that would make for interesting reading. Room 237 was on the second floor, accessible by an external staircase that creaked ominously under my weight. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices inside, Serene's and Ricky's, both raised in what sounded like an argument. I knocked once and pushed the door open. The room was exactly what I'd expected. Cheap furniture, stained carpet, and the lingering smell of cigarettes and desperation. Seren was sitting on the bed, still wearing her black business suit from the prenup signing. Ricky was pacing near the window, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive shirt wrinkled. "Darren," Seren said, standing up when she saw me. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Ricky stopped pacing and turned to face me. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably early 30s, with the kind of artificial tan and perfectly white teeth that screamed car salesman. But there was something desperate in his eyes now, the look of a man who'd just watched his world collapse. "This is all your fault," he said, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You ruined everything." "I ruined everything?" I laughed. "That's rich, coming from a guy who's been sleeping with my wife and stealing from his business partner." "I wasn't stealing." "Actually, you were." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. "According to the records I obtained from Ardell Motors, you've been using company credit to finance your little love nest here. 18 separate charges over the past 6 months, totaling just over $12,000. Ricky's face went pale. "How did you get those records?" "Trent gave them to me, right after he fired you and called the police." The silence that followed was deafening. Seren sank back down onto the bed, her face a mask of shock and despair. "The police?" she whispered. "Fraud charges," I confirmed. "Both of you. Seren for embezzling from her company and Ricky for theft and credit fraud. Jessica's facing charges too, for her part in the scheme." Ricky started pacing again, his movements becoming more agitated. This wasn't supposed to happen. Jessica said she had everything under control. Jessica lied, I said simply. About everything. Did you really think you could manipulate 2 marriages and steal from multiple companies without anyone noticing? We weren't hurting anyone. You weren't hurting anyone? I pulled the digital camera out of my bag and set it on the dresser. Let me show you exactly who you were hurting. I turned on the camera and began scrolling through the photos I'd taken over the past week. Pictures of Ava crying in her room after reading the social media comments about our family. Pictures of our house, which now had a for sale sign in the front yard. Pictures of the boxing gym, where I'd spent countless hours working through my anger and disappointment. This is what you destroyed, I said, showing them image after image. A family, a home, a life that took 22 years to build. Seren was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the photos. Darren, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. How far did you mean for it to go? I don't know. I was confused, unhappy. Jessica kept telling me that I deserved better, that you were holding me back. So you decided to steal from your company and plan to run away with a car salesman? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I pulled out the manila envelope and dumped its contents onto the bed. Bank statements, credit card bills, hotel receipts, and printed emails scattered across the cheap bedspread. This is documentation of every lie you've told, every dollar you've stolen, and every plan you've made to destroy our marriage. Ricky stopped pacing and stared at the documents. Where did you get all this? Public records, mostly, plus some help from friends who work in the right places. I picked up one of the bank statements. Did you know that Seren opened a secret checking account 6 months ago, the same week she started meeting you here? Seren's face went white. How did you find out? I'm a lot smarter than you gave me credit for. I picked up another document. And this is a copy of the loan application you filled out using my social security number, $25,000, which you've been using to finance your new lifestyle. That's identity theft, Ricky said, backing away from the bed. Yes, it is, which means Seren's facing federal charges in addition to the state charges for embezzlement. The room fell silent except for the sound of Seren's quiet sobbing. Outside, I could hear cars passing on the highway, people going about their normal lives while ours fell apart in a cheap motel room. What do you want from us? Ricky asked finally. I want the truth, all of it, starting with how long this has been going on and ending with what you plan to do with my money. For the next hour, I listened as Seren and Ricky laid out the full scope of their deception. It had started innocently enough. Jessica introducing them at a party, casual conversations that turned into secret meetings, emotional affair that became physical. But it had quickly escalated into something much more sinister. Jessica had encouraged Seren to steal from her company, providing advice on how to manipulate the expense account system. Ricky had used his position at the dealership to launder money and create false invoices. Together, they'd planned to drain my business accounts and disappear to Florida, where Ricky claimed to have connections who could help them start over. We never meant to hurt you, Seren said when the confession was complete. But you did hurt me. You hurt our daughter. You hurt everyone who trusted you. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. I stood up and began packing the documents back into the envelope. The police will be here in about 20 minutes. I called them on the way over. Both Seren and Ricky started talking at once, pleading with me to reconsider, promising to make things right, begging for another chance. But I wasn't listening anymore. There's something else you should know, I said, cutting through their desperate appeals. Ava recorded a video this afternoon. She's posting it on social media tonight. I pulled out my phone and showed them the preview, our daughter, looking directly into the camera with the kind of brutal honesty that only teenagers could muster, explaining exactly what her mother had done and how it had affected our family. She's not taking your side anymore, I said to Seren. She knows everything, the affairs, the stealing, the lies, and she's decided that she's better off without you. Seren's face crumpled. She can't mean that. She does, and honestly, I don't blame her. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to face them one last time. You wanted a different life, I said to Seren. Well, now you have one. Enjoy it. As I walked down the creaky stairs and across the parking lot, I could hear sirens in the distance. The police were arriving right on schedule, just as I'd promised. But this wasn't the end of the story. There was still one more scene to play out, one final confrontation that would determine how this whole mess would be remembered. And I had a feeling it was going to be spectacular. The annual Riverside Community Festival was supposed to be a celebration of small-town life, complete with live music, local vendors, and enough gossip to fuel conversations through the winter months. This year, it had become something else entirely, the stage for the final act of our very public drama. I arrived at the festival grounds early Saturday morning, carrying a folding chair and a thermos of coffee. The setup crew was already at work, stringing lights between the oak trees and arranging tables for the various booths and displays. Mrs. Preston waved at me from across the field where she was helping to organize the bake sale. Word of Thursday's prenup disaster had spread through every social circle in town, and I'd become something of a local celebrity overnight. "Darren," she called out, "how are you holding up, dear?" "Better than expected," I replied, setting up my chair near the main stage where the afternoon's entertainment would take place. The truth was, I felt better than I had in years. The weight of living with lies and deception had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a clarity of purpose that was almost intoxicating. My phone buzzed with a text from Arden. "Everything ready for this afternoon?" "All set," I replied. "This should be interesting." Over the next few hours, the festival grounds filled with families and couples enjoying the perfect autumn weather. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air, a sense that people were waiting for something more dramatic than the usual pie-eating contest and three-legged races. They didn't have to wait long. Seren arrived at noon, accompanied by Jessica and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Both women had been released on bail following their arrests Thursday night, but the legal proceedings had clearly taken their toll. I watched from my chair as they made their way through the crowd, drawing stares and whispered comments from everyone they passed. This was their first public appearance since the scandal broke, and they were clearly struggling with the attention. Ricky was nowhere to be seen, which made sense considering he was still in custody pending a bail hearing. According to my sources, his theft charges were more serious than initially thought, involving multiple businesses and a pattern of fraud going back several years. At 2 p.m., the festival organizers announced that there would be a special presentation on the main stage. The crowd gathered around as I walked up to the microphone, carrying a manila folder and wearing my best public speaking smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "thank you for coming out today to support our community. I know many of you have heard rumors about recent events involving my family, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to set the record straight." The crowd fell silent, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the festival's 30-year history. 3 days ago, my wife Seren and I attended what was supposed to be a simple prenup signing ceremony. What happened instead was the exposure of a complex fraud scheme involving multiple people and businesses in our community. I opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs, enlarged and mounted on poster board. The first image showed Seren and Ricky together at the Riverside Motel. This photo was taken 6 months ago, documenting the beginning of an extramarital affair that would eventually destroy multiple families and businesses. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people recognized the faces in the photograph. Near the back of the gathering, I could see Seren trying to push her way toward the exit, but the crowd was too dense for her to escape. The second photograph showed bank statements and credit card bills. This documentation reveals a pattern of theft and fraud involving my wife's employer, Meridian Insurance, and Ardell Motors, where her lover worked. More gasps, followed by angry murmurs as people began to understand the scope of the deception. The third photograph was the most damaging, a copy of the loan application Seren had filed using my social security number. This represents identity theft and fraud totaling over $25,000, money that was used to finance hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and gifts for her lover. The crowd's mood was shifting from curiosity to anger as the full extent of Seren's crimes became clear. These were people who worked hard for their money, who paid their taxes and followed the rules. The idea that someone in their community had been stealing and lying on such a scale was deeply offensive to their sense of fairness. But I wasn't finished yet. However, I continued, raising my voice to cut through the growing noise, the most shocking revelation came when we discovered that this entire scheme was orchestrated by someone we all trusted and respected. I pulled out the final photograph, showing Jessica and Ricky together in what was clearly an intimate embrace. Jessica Ardell, wife of prominent businessman Trent Ardell, was not just aware of her husband's employee's affair with my wife. She planned it, encouraged it, and used it to cover her own affair with the same man. The crowd erupted in chaos. Jessica, who had been standing near the front of the gathering, was suddenly surrounded by angry neighbors demanding explanations. Someone shouted that she should be ashamed of herself. Another voice called for her to leave town, but the most dramatic reaction came from an unexpected source. Trent Ardell pushed through the crowd carrying a cardboard box and a bullhorn. He climbed onto the stage beside me, his face red with anger and humiliation. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the microphone. I stepped aside and let him take center stage. My wife, he said, his voice amplified by the sound system, has destroyed our marriage, our business, and our reputation in this community. But before she disappears with whatever money she managed to steal, I think everyone should know exactly what kind of person she really is. He opened the cardboard box and began pulling out documents and photographs. These are copies of bank statements showing that Jessica has been stealing from our business for over 2 years, not just to finance her affair, but to support a gambling addiction that she hid from everyone, including me. The crowd fell silent again, transfixed by this public dismantling of one of their most prominent families. These photographs, Trent continued, holding up a series of images, show Jessica with multiple men over the past 3 years. Ricky Bell wasn't her first affair. He was just the most recent. The revelations kept coming, each one more damaging than the last. Jessica had been living a double life for years, stealing from her husband's business, manipulating her friends, and using her social position to cover a pattern of deception that made Seren's crimes look minor by comparison. When Trent finished his presentation, the crowd was completely silent. Even Mrs. Preston had stopped her usual commentary, apparently overwhelmed by the scope of the scandal. But there was one more surprise waiting. Ava appeared at the edge of the crowd, carrying her phone and live streaming the entire event to her social media followers. At 16, she had a better understanding of how to control a narrative than most adults, and she'd been documenting everything for the past week. "Dad," she called out, "can I say something?" I nodded and helped her onto the stage. She took the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in the social media age. "Hi, everyone," she began, looking directly into her phone's camera. "I'm Ava Halloway, and I want to talk about what it's like to find out that your mom is a criminal." The crowd was completely transfixed as my daughter laid out her perspective on the scandal with the kind of brutal honesty that only teenagers could muster. "For the past 6 months, my mom has been lying to everyone. To my dad, to me, to her friends, and to her employer. She stole money, she cheated on her marriage, and she tried to destroy our family for a guy who sells used cars." She paused, looking around at the faces in the crowd. "But here's the thing. I'm not embarrassed anymore. Because my dad showed me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when people you love turn out to be different than you thought they were." She handed the microphone back to me and jumped down from the stage, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could stop her. I looked out at the sea of faces staring back at me. Neighbors, friends, acquaintances who'd known our family for years and were now seeing us in an entirely new light. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "this concludes our special presentation. Thank you for your attention, and please enjoy the rest of the festival." As I walked off the stage, the crowd began to disperse, but the conversations were just beginning. I could hear fragments of discussion as people processed what they'd just witnessed. "I can't believe Jessica would do something like that. Poor Trent, he must be devastated. Did you see how composed Darren was? I would have been a mess. That daughter of his has more backbone than most adults." I found a quiet spot under one of the oak trees and sat down to watch the aftermath unfold. Across the field, I could see Seren and Jessica being confronted by various groups of people, their former friends demanding explanations and expressing their disgust. But the most satisfying sight was watching them realize that their social circle had completely turned against them. These were people who valued honesty and integrity, who worked hard for their money and expected the same from others. The idea that they'd been deceived and manipulated by people they trusted was deeply offensive to their sense of community. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike at the gym. "Dude, that was epic. Drinks tonight?" Another message came from my business partner. "Saw the live stream. Holy cow. Call me when you get a chance." And finally, a message from Arden. "Congratulations. You just won the public relations war. They'll never recover from this." As the sun began to set over the festival grounds, I gathered my things and headed toward the parking lot. The day's events had been exactly what I'd hoped for. A complete and public vindication that would ensure everyone in town knew exactly who was responsible for destroying our family. But as I reached my truck, I found one final surprise waiting for me. Seren was leaning against the driver's side door, her face streaked with tears and her expensive clothes wrinkled from the day's ordeal. "Darren," she said quietly, "we need to talk." "No," I replied. "We really don't. Please, just 5 minutes." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd shared my life for over 20 years and who'd thrown it all away for a fantasy that had never had any chance of success. "You have 2 minutes," I said finally. "I know I can't undo what I've done. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that I never meant for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go?" "I don't know. I was lost. Confused. Jessica kept telling me that I deserved better, that you were holding me back from the life I should have. So you decided to steal and lie and cheat. I made terrible choices. I know that now. I unlocked my truck and opened the driver's side door. Your 2 minutes are up. Darren, wait. What happens now? I paused with one foot in the truck and looked back at her. Now you face the consequences of your choices. You'll go to court, you'll probably go to prison, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you destroyed everything good in your life for a man who was using you. And us? Is there any chance? There is no us anymore, Seren. There hasn't been for months. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see her standing in the parking lot, looking lost and defeated. As I drove away from the festival grounds, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. The weight of deception and betrayal had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by the satisfaction of justice served and truth revealed. The radio was playing an old song about second chances and new beginnings. I turned up the volume and drove toward home, toward whatever came next, toward a future that was finally completely my own. Behind me, the festival continued, but I was no longer part of that story. I'd written my own ending, and it was exactly what I'd wanted it to be.